in a way, I could understand if I wanted to be an Instagram witch, I would know how to do that, and I would get lots more listeners for Burning Tarot. If I wanted to spread links leading back to these various articles or programs and things that I write about for helping people deal with their technology addictions and problems, yes, it would spread wider. And I just think that spreading wider has become something that's negative for me as a person. And then what the various algorithms and AIs and everything are doing with that connection that we're all trying to make with each other has gone beyond negative into stupid, evil, wrong.
This time on the Plutopia News Network, writer, artist, and tarot reader Tiffany Lee Brown calls into the virtual studio from Sisters, Oregon. She joins John and Scoop for a wide-ranging chat about her writing, art, tarot, and the Great Woo.
Welcome to the latest episode of the Plutopia News Network, including Scoop, aka the Voice of God, and John, and our special guest today, Tiffany Lee Brown, aka Magdalen, aka T. More usually T these days, I've noticed. T is a writer, an interdisciplinary artist. She lives in the woods somewhere in Oregon, and she's been a tarot reader for 30 years. And she's created the collaborative Burning Tarot deck, starring the denizens of Black Rock City, Nevada, at the Burning Man Festival. In response to the COVID crisis, she's opened up her tarot reading practice to the public. And you can access that at tiffanyleebrown.com for the Burning Tarot Fake Podcast. Why do you say fake podcast? Sounds real to me.
Well, it was just kind of like, hello, I'm talking into my iPhone, my old crummy, not the new edition of an SE iPhone, and wandering about in the woods. So to me, to say real podcast would imply like I'm scripting things out and we're going to have an intro music thingy and production values. And I just, a few years ago, people were asking me to start a podcast, and I considered it, and I realized I just didn't want to mess with all that stuff. I had even bought a fancy audio recorder, and I ended up giving that to somebody who was doing a nonprofit podcast. So I call it a fake podcast because I'm aware of its limitations. It's really me just taking people on a walk and pulling some tarot cards,
Well, they used to say on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. And in a podcast, nobody knows whether you've got production values or not. They just hear what they hear. And your podcast sounds pretty good.
Oh, well, I'm glad it sounds good. I like to acknowledge that what most of us are, and I think during COVID, everybody's celebrating this now, kind of being forced to perhaps, behind the production values or lack thereof of everything we do, it's just us. We're just little people in our little houses trying to do our thing. Maybe we don't have a house. I didn't for a while. And there's this pressure to present ourselves as, fancy. And I resist that, I guess.
Well, I listened to your latest podcast, the one from May 1st, and it was really spot on as far as the week I had. So you have to take credit for that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I've gotten a lot of feedback. I believe it's just a handful of listeners because at first this wasn't particularly public. And I was actually inspired. I was inspired to make the Burning Tarot podcast by knowing that several of my friends in bigger cities were having a hell of a lot harder time than I am. And I'm having a hard time too, man. Everybody is. And one of them is a hospice chaplain and a regular tarot client of mine. And I just thought, I knew she would be having such a hard time. What a difficult job to do during this time. And so I kind of started it in support of her and a couple of other friends. And it's interesting. I do get.
I think that's a mutual friend of ours, right?
I think it is, John. Yes.
Who will sometime in the future, hopefully, be a guest on this podcast.
Yes, she's finishing up a book. So, yeah. But that kind of comment of like, oh, that reading matched my week. I'm getting a lot of that. And I think that one of the more positive aspects of the internet is that it enables people to find each other in little small pods, little fringes, little groups at the right moments in time. And so whoever is, probably everybody, it's not like 100,000 people having the exact same emotional current during the same week, but there's probably 100 of us. And if a podcast helps us find each other and feel a little less alone riding the particular waves, I just think that's a nice thing to participate in.
Yeah, that makes me think about the idea behind Fringeware, which you and I were both part of. And how we said at the time, of course, the internet was kind of a new thing and just starting to mainstream. And our realization was that there were all these people in pockets all over the country that were like-minded, but they couldn't find the other like-minded people because there weren't any people like them where they were. But once they could get online, they could find those people.
And it's very interesting to see how that's played out over the last 30 years, where that, what we thought was such a positive thing, right, has turned into this pretty negative thing of silos and tribes and micro-targeting. And John, let me just say,
I think what was positive is still there, maybe, but there's all this additional stuff. But sorry for interrupting. Go ahead.
Well, I think you're right. Like, that positive aspect is still there, but most of us weren't terribly prescient in looking at how that might play out over time. I know that I was the author Richard Cadre and I were great buddies in the 90s, and we were always talking about this kind of stuff. And we would write, what did we used to say? We would write for the 16-year-old in Nowheresville, Ohio. We imagined this person stuck somewhere in the Midwest without like-minded weirdos like us, to talk to or be with. And when I wrote for his Covert Culture Sourcebook series, we would talk about that 16-year-old. And that was it was a generous impulse that we all had to find that kid who might have been us when we were teenagers. And at the time I was quite young. I had just been a teenager out in the middle of the country in Oregon. So I knew what it was like to be different from other people and not necessarily be able to reach out and find others like me.
Well, now it seems like that is missing a lot. Most of the stuff I see written, especially online, is just the opposite of someone up on their pedestal talking down to the lowly masses.
That's what you feel like you're seeing now more in internet media?
In some, quite a bit of the internet media, not the more reliable older sources, but some of the new stuff is just all, pontificating, and you're not nearly as smart as me, so I'm going to tell you what it's all about. I see a lot of that.
Have like sort of YouTube conspiracy kind of channels, that kind of thing?
Oh, yeah, and any place on Facebook, it's just it's a nightmare of pontification.
Yes, I used to pontificate
a lot of conspiracy
on Facebook
theories.
a lot.
There's a,
and I quit social media 2 or 3 years ago now. And I did have to get on briefly for a client job I was working on, but mainly I've just been done with that for a long time. Broke my Facebook addiction, and have felt much better. And I really did it in response to Jaron Lanier's book, or rather an article interviewing him about his book, 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now, which I thought was hilariously named, clickbait name and everything. And he's he's not always right, but he's always thoughtful and smart and has been around all this longer than I have. And I was just reading this interview series called The Internet Apologizes. It was on maybe New York Magazine. And I just laughed and laughed. And I was like, you know what? I'm done. I'd been writing about it, researching, dealing with my own bad habits in regards to social media for a couple of years.
You didn't accept the Internet's apology.
I laughed along with it, and I said, I know that Jaron is right, and that by participating in this, all I'm doing is making myself stressed out and miserable, and contributing to a really, evil global phenomenon that's just benefiting these real assholes. It's like, I don't owe Zuckerberg a damn thing. I got to get out of here.
So I've been on two sides of that. Recently, maybe a month and a half ago or something like that, I sort of announced to everybody that I wasn't going to delete my account, but I was not going to be active on Facebook anymore. Mm-hmm. And I did find that ceasing that activity, I was certainly happier. I mean, not as distracted and crazy, but I started to feel a kind of concern, and my concern was, I know people who work with social media to sort of work at trying to inoculate against the various viral memes that are so wrong and counterproductive. Mm-hmm. And the only way to contradict the bad stuff on the internet is to have people making a response. For instance, if people are spreading weird conspiracy theories, it should be helpful and important, really, to have people who respond to those and point them out as conspiracy theories and really crazy and incorrect. Not so much to try to convince the people who are spreading the theories, but the people who are sort of watching, the lurkers, to get the message out to them that, no, this is not true. This is crazy shit. And I felt kind of an obligation to go back and do that, which I have done, but I'm getting pretty tired of it.
Well, I think that's a good point, John. And I think that I basically think that if we had maybe one representative for every 10 or 15,000 of us who care about these issues, and that representative would be the person who goes on and does the research and debunks the bad theories and represents, and then the rest of us just stay away.
It sounds like we need a copy editor, like in a newspaper. Someone can correct all the misspellings and bad data.
Fact checker.
And a fact checker, which most of the newspapers don't have anymore, by the way. I found out the hard way by reporting in a newspaper that someone who had died who had not. It was terrible. Oh, my gosh. Anyway,
I'm sure that came as a great relief to them.
Yeah, they were probably relieved to find out that they were still alive.
Oh, boy. That was horrible. I felt terrible. But so I feel like one of the best ways to combat not just the particular, this bad theory, that bad theory, this bad tendency, is to leave. I came to that conclusion. Like, for a while, I wanted to stick around to be a part of some very interesting conversations. My Facebook followers, whatever, wasn't that, it was like 1,000 or 2,000 people. So it's whatever, a handful of people talking to each other. And we talked about deep stuff because that's what I'm interested in. And I don't regret many of those conversations, but I regret all the other stuff that happened around it and spending so much time with a bunch of ugliness. And I thought long and hard about this, like, well, should I be here having some productive conversations within a largely unproductive landscape at expense to my time, my energy, my emotions? And, or should I leave? And I ended up, especially after reading Jaron Lanier and some other books and experts and things, I concluded that my best chance at showing what I really think of all this shit is to walk out the door and just not participate at all. And it was interesting. I've heard back from a number of people who noticed my exit, and it helped them re-examine their relationship to technology. And I've also been writing a series of articles for my little small town newspaper where I write now, dealing with our relationship to technology, to devices, and our kids and their relationships to technology as well. So in a way, I could understand if I wanted to be an Instagram witch, I would know how to do that, and I would get lots more listeners for Burning Tarot. If I wanted to spread links leading back to these various articles or programs and things that I write about for helping people deal with their technology addictions and problems, yes, it would spread wider. And I just think that spreading wider has become something that's negative for me as a person. And then what the various algorithms and AIs and everything are doing with that connection that we're all trying to make with each other has gone beyond negative into stupid, evil, wrong, and horrific.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of extremely negative stuff on Facebook, and I feel like a bit of a weasel because really the only thing I'll post on Facebook is stuff pimping our podcast and our website, and I feel like a bit of an ad exec from admin or something, but you're
posting some other stuff.
Yeah, usually bizarre stuff that I have a dark sense of humor, twisted. Is what my parents used to say. My mom would always say, "There's something wrong with that boy. I think I dropped him too many times," but that may be so. Yeah. But some of the things I see, people posting this deeply personal stuff. I mean, to the point of, oh God, I can't unread that. And I've tried to avoid that because people really don't want to know about a 73-year-old guy's trials and tribulations.
Well, I would disagree there. That is my favorite thing about the internet, about the well, which was my original entree into what we would now call social media, what was then called virtual community. I am still part of the well. And when I was on social media, that was really my favorite thing about it, is that having a little bit of distance, not being face-to-face with people, can help folks show their real selves to each other in some circumstances. And I actually like that. I like to see people being real, personal, confessional, which is a word that gets thrown around whenever a woman writes about anything personal or puts out a memoir or mentions that she has a cunt or a period or anything. So I think there's a very positive aspect to the personal and confessional aspects of this, unless it turns into a faked performance of your personal life. But
that's what I've seen.
That's just me.
But, one of the things that, that I was referring to is, John and I grew up in the same small town in West Texas, and I've stayed in touch with a lot of those people there on Facebook. And to to say they're conservative is being kind. I mean, they're just to the just to the right of Adolf Hitler, some of them. So I've blocked them, but you can't avoid some of these things. And you hear this thing, you go, how could you possibly have grown up in this country and still say this stuff? And that's the stuff you can't unread.
It's scary. It's scary seeing and kind of feeling what others are really thinking. And I think this sort of, Russian and Cambridge Analytica stuff in 2016 showed us that, or it triggered real people that we knew at some point in our real lives, to reveal some stuff about them that might have been sort of horrifying to others around them.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, we used to not know this stuff, and we're saying now, oh, people are going crazy. Well, they're not going crazy. They're just telling you how crazy they are. You couldn't hear it before. You couldn't. I mean, they had no way to publish their innermost thoughts, and now pretty much everybody is starting to do that, or they're starting to at least share memes that are reflective of what they're thinking. And I guess one question is whether their thinking is being manipulated or whether they were thinking that all along.
I would say that there's a lot of both. And from what I've read, which is a lot on the subject, the manipulation factor is large. And the ease of manipulating people into thinking about some subject, that in itself you could say is like manipulation, or you're directing someone's attention. And I remember we talked about this back in the Fringeware days, and
the economy of attention.
Paco Zandernathan was the first person to introduce me to the attention economy idea and how that relates to the corporate body. I believe I hired him to write about that on Signum Press, which was an online magazine I did years ago, or I was their editor. And that's gone beyond the sort of mildly dark arts associated with the arts and media and marketing and advertising that we used to wield, which sometimes crossed the line. And now it's totally, crossed all the lines, jumped all the sharks. It's really easy to target people and get them to think about stuff, to believe stuff, and buy stuff, of course. Can't forget that piece. And it shows the frailty, I think, of people and our egos and our gullibility, which also shows our openness. That's a positive thing about it. It shows that we're open. We can still receive new information. We can process it and think about it. We can try on somebody else's point of view for a while. And I think that all is nice stuff. But that positive urge can be and is deeply manipulated by Facebook, by Google, by their advertisers.
I have to agree on that. They've made me buy things I didn't want, and I realize it's like, oh God, you're an idiot.
Well, that's the fun part. I mean, that's the weird part, is you can stand there and know that you're an idiot and that you're being manipulated.
And I still reach for my wallet.
Yeah, people mistakenly believe that having a little modicum of awareness about media somehow makes us immune to these forces. Like, well, I've read a lot of media theory and I've been writing and thinking about this for 30 years, so I'm really cool. Nobody's going to manipulate me. Total bullshit. Somebody is still manipulating me while I'm having that thought or that conversation about my great mental abilities. I don't know. I think it's interesting and sad, and because I am a writer, I work in journalism, whatever. I'm a poet, and I do marketing stuff because, hey, you got to pay some bills sometime. And I think I might even just be done with that kind of work going forward, or I'm going to be even more selective about my clients and what I'll work on. I stopped working on social media campaigns a couple of years ago, but I work with organizations that they're still doing social campaigns. I'm just like, yep, I have a million great ideas for that. I'm just not going to say them because I see who owns this and who's benefiting from it. And it is not these little businesses. It is not these cool nonprofits. It is not the everyday people.
Well, you used to live as I understand, in Portland, and later
I lived in Portland for years, yeah.
And you moved to Sisters, Oregon, which is a slightly smaller area. Did you find that move altered the way you work? Did it change your view of your writing, your art, what you do?
Yes, it has been a marvelous move, and it was preceded by a transition period where my family lived in a little 16-foot travel trailer and wandered around the West Coast and lived out in the woods. There's lots of homeless people living out in the woods, by the way, out here. So we were not alone. We met a lot of interesting folks. And so that was kind of like a palate cleanser to just get out of the Portland bubble. And I had also lived in the Bay Area and New York City and various other places that are really concerned with themselves and their image and their liberal bubble media stuff, including the arts, literature, and academia. So I've been very part of that most of my life. But I did grow up in Oregon, out in the woods, and coming to a really small town and then living in the woods near there definitely opened me up. The move was partly caused by health issues that I was having in Portland. I got toxic mold illness, and I was really super messed up. And raising a small child, my husband had had a severe accident and severe traumatic brain injury, almost died. So things have been pretty hectic. And just getting out of there to benefit my health and return to nature was also resetting my brain and my art practice and my writing. So I got out here, and I really I've been trying to be more open-minded, is the short version. The place where I live is politically divided, and I've made a very strong effort to at least set aside some of the time my own preconceptions about what is the right way to proceed. Is the liberal or progressive agenda always the right one? Even when I am agreeing with some kind of policy or issue or tendency, are the liberals and progressives communicating well? Or are they really being assholes about it? So I stepped back, and getting off of Facebook and such was part of that, so that I could just recognize that I too had been somewhat radicalized into my own tribe and had become closed-minded as a result. So my community journalism is definitely affected by trying to be more open-minded about everybody who lives here, including the most conservative rancher, and the most liberal retiree from Berkeley, because they're all here. And then my personal artistic and tarot practice have just been fantastic because I'm out in the woods and I'm communing with nature a lot. And that's how I grew up. And I really needed to return to the woods, Mama Nature, Mother Earth, the trees.
I experienced the same thing when I moved from the Bay Area to my place out here in the country outside of Austin. And I swore that I wasn't going to change anything. I was going to be just the same guy that doing the same kind of work. And that didn't last 6 months. And I'm really glad it didn't.
Right. Well, I mean, sometimes we just need to stir things up and change around, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I remembered from when I was working in the news business in San Francisco in the 70s and 80s, having to sit on a bus bench with a notepad trying to write my story that I was going to file, and there are people screaming and yelling and, all the noise, and I realized that was a really bad thing to do, and I would try to find quiet places, and you can't find a quiet place in the metropolis.
No, you can't. I mean, I feel like that's great that I had some phase in my life where I wanted that much noise and I wanted to make that much noise. I mean, I was like in West Oakland in a warehouse next to where the freeway had fallen down in the earthquake, and that's where I lived, and places like that. And yeah, it does seem kind of incomprehensible to me now. I would not like it. But it's fun to have a phase in your life where you can tolerate and be interested in that much noise and human activity. I find myself increasingly, and COVID has really changed this for me or amplified it for me. There's a whole lot that happens, going to use a new age word here, energetically. Your energy freaking changes if you're plugged in with other people a lot. And if you are remote or have solitude or spend time in nature, the energy changes. I'm getting older. I need more of that nature energy. And I'm just less interested in the human bustle. And when I do make excursions out into it, I think most of my life I didn't understand that I was really dissipating my available energy and time in a very haphazard way. And I did that online and I did that in real life. And back then I had a ton of energy. But I think it contributes to health problems, mental health problems, which I also have. And, and to my work. Sometimes I'm very productive, but there's a good chance that if I hadn't been living the wild city life or sitting on that bench making notes for the news story like you described, some of that energy could have gone into, some great masterwork or a lot of meditation, or it's hard to say what would have happened.
I was reading on your bio about the Easter Island project, and I was fascinated. I couldn't find anything on it, but it sounds like exactly something I'd want to go see. What was the Easter Island project?
The Easter Island project was a sprawling and kind of weird interdisciplinary art project that I did over the course of about 7 years. And so Easter Island project was me taking on the idea of why do we create and why must we create? Why are we filled with this compulsion to make stuff, to write novels, to innovate and invent atom bombs? And in my case, this was driven by a very severe attack of the biological clock. I had intended not to procreate, not to have children. And in the course of becoming a stepmom and hitting my mid-30s, I became, completely overwhelmed and racked by the desire to have a baby. And I didn't want to upset my life that way, or my relationship, which had been started under the notion that we're not going to have kids. We're going to help raise your daughter, and that'll be great. So it radically changed my life finding that I didn't just kind of want to have a baby, but that my entire inner self and bodily self were demanding this of me. And I fought it. I fought that natural urge for like 5 years. And part of my fight and part of my investigation was this Easter Island project. So I started investigating why other people want to create, including the biological clock, including having children or not having children. A lot of explorations that led me to conversations with people who were infertile or disabled and had other reasons not to procreate. And I have a partial disability, and I thought I shouldn't even try to do this. So I could relate, and I learned a lot from all these folks. And the artwork itself took the form of public conversations, of participatory artwork, where people were invited to riff on this theme and produce their own small work of art or words, and send them to me to be included in this larger project. And then their works, I would photograph them or make little stop motion videos out of them. And then I'd show, I'm in New York, and I'm in New York projecting on the wall a slideshow or a stop motion based on these artworks that other people made for the Easter Island project. And then maybe I have a talk, and then the audience and I sit around and chat, and people have brought more stuff to this art space in the Bronx, and we share food and drink together. So that would be one example of one thing we did. Everything had its own different forms. One of them was more of a performance in a abandoned military facility in Washington State. Lots of crazy explorations, and the unexpected culmination of this was me going to Easter Island while 4 months pregnant. And while I was there, I brought some of these creations that people had made for the project, which I called seeds. And I worked with them in the context of Easter Island, which for me was a symbol of many things that I'm not going to get into right now. And I did a performative ritual there in this very spiritually charged, amazing place. And documented that. And then I had a year-long installation at Reed College in Portland. And this was an installation that kept changing. So I would bring in more of the seeds. I had a 7-screen video installation. It was a crazy project. And I obviously am blathering. I still have no idea how to really explain what we did there.
Well, that means it was successful. If you can't explain it, it's probably
well, good.
Continuing to evolve. Good. I'm fascinated. You went to Easter Island, something I've always wanted to do. As a child, I read National Geographic all the time, and they would always have these amazing photo essays and essays about Easter Island. And
me too.
And I was just like, well, I've got to go there. And then I looked at the globe and went, maybe not.
Well, I used frequent flyer miles, and it took 2 rounds of them. It wasn't just like one international flight. It was like 2 international flights worth. Got me the tickets. 1 second, just 1 second. Are you walking through, honey? Okay. My son's just running through the house here for a sec. So just give me a moment here.
No hurry. We can edit. Or
we
not.
Can edit.
Or not.
Good.
We like reality.
We like reality.
What a concept.
Bold statement. Here, let's listen to the birds while he's doing whatever he's doing in there. Can you hear it out here?
Yes, actually.
So this is my usual workspace. I am out here under the ponderosa pines with the birds, and weather allowing, so basically 4 months out of the year, maybe a little more, I'm wandering around in these woods, and that's where I do my tarot podcasts. And that's where I do a lot of the tarot readings as well that people hire me to do, which I do in audio form. So each person gets kind of an experience of wandering through this woods with me. And to me, the woods are so meaningful and the pines are so beautiful. And so I'm really loving sharing that with other people. And when we pull our cards, we're doing it out here in nature. And even without the cards, the nature itself has all these various woo-woo and philosophical messages for me and for us.
When and how did you start reading tarot?
I started with tarot. Boy, that's a rather insistent bird. I'm going to go back in. Those are Stellar's jays, by the way. They're not messing around. I started reading tarot in Berkeley oh no, I'm lying. I actually started reading tarot in Dublin, Ireland. Wait, I'm lying again. I don't remember when I don't remember when I started reading tarot, but it was the late 80s. I do remember that my first deck that was given to me and that I really started bonding with was the medieval Scapini deck given to me in Dublin, Ireland, where I was living and going to Trinity College and doing theater. And there was this deck, this golden, beautiful deck was involved in a show that I was doing some work on. And the director gave me the deck after the show. And once I got back to Berkeley in the early 90s, I delved into all kinds of mystical mayhem all at once. And I still am trying to figure out that whole phase of my life. It was so intense and crazy. And one thread of it was tarot. And there was a fellow in Berkeley. I don't know if he really wants to be identified. I'll tell you his nickname, Acid Adam. And he was an engineering student, graduate student at the University of California at Berkeley, where I had done my undergraduate work. And he dropped out to basically, we were all tripping out and having psychedelic experiences and exploring the great mystic, vast unknown. And there were lots of us doing it in that time and place. And Adam really helped me begin a true tarot practice. And he was a very good astrologer. So he was also introducing me to astrology. And there were a bunch of old dudes who would hang out at Cafe Mediterraneum, the fabled Berkeley cafe. And they would hang out in the upstairs balcony, and I would meet them up there, and they were old astrology dudes, and they would teach me. So I was immersed in a lot of things all at once, and the tarot spoke most loudly, although these days I'm doing an awful lot of astrology as well. And Adam had been working with me using a deck called the Morgan Greer. And at some point, he just laughed and said, obviously, this deck is yours. You keep it. So I kept it. And I kept up with many esoteric pursuits for many, many years, on and off. And I found that for me, it was important to get away from established systems of meaning and groups of people with certain esoteric practices and hand symbols and all that stuff. For me, that turned into a trap repeatedly. I also have I was a very religious child and had a lot of mystical experiences personally, but then became disenchanted with the church. So I'm pretty sensitive to how people misuse magical, marvelous, amazing energies and mysteries, and how they tend to do it when they get in groups and establish protocols and rules and tell you exactly how to do stuff and establish power structures which can be abused.
So it becomes an ideology, in other words.
Well, it's not just ideology. I think it's the structure of gathering. It's not just the way that we might structure or systematize the thoughts themselves or the actions and rituals, but the way that people as groups tend to, how we tend to overdo it on getting in a rut, thinking we know what something means, thinking it should always be the same every time we do it. It should always produce the same results, like a recipe or a spell. And
trying to socialize as an inherently subjective experience and make it work for a collective.
Yeah. I mean, I miss the collective when it comes to like mystical and religious practices. I yearn for that. But for me, it works best in big, loose, like, let's all go to Burning Man or Drowning Rat. And some of us will just be laughing about the energies, and some of us will be taking it seriously. And there's not too many rules. That has changed at Burning Man over the years once they established the 10 principles and all that. I'm like, okay, you guys are starting to sound like a religion. But for me, tarot is interesting because it provides it has a lot of history, and a lot of collective energy has gone into creating that history and that kind of energetic vibe that follows the tarot around with its practitioners. But I view it as a key. It's just a key that unlocks a doorway. And then I, the individual, walk through that doorway or welcome the great woo energies and spirits that come through the doorway to me. The tarot itself doesn't really present an entire worldview or system, or I mean, some people practice it that way. If you go online and search on anything for tarot, you're going to come up with Biddy Tarot. That'll pop up a lot. And, she's made a system for how she thinks tarot works. And she's got great SEO. So it's really it's about the SEO and monetizing her thoughts about the tarot, sharing them in workshop form, certifying readers. And so you can do that with the tarot. For me, what's important is to learn, book learning from masters, that sort of thing, and then just wipe it out, throw it out the window so that you can really allow the cards themselves to open a key, open a door, and welcome whatever walks through. It may not look like what the masters told you, what the teacher taught you, what the book says. I think that's
more intuitive. It would be intuitive and depend on the moment and the person and the energies in the given moment, right?
Absolutely. It's a very intuitive practice. And I feel like my tarot practice and my artistic and literary practices over the years, my personal push has been, what has it been? I have been called, or it feels like I'm pushed. I'm pushed by something to keep moving past what has been established, what apparently works, what's supposed to look like this, what's supposed to mean that. To me, those systems and those categories and boundaries, they're so easy to get lost in. You can get so much like ego and intellectual satisfaction out of those things that you completely lose touch with the moment and being able to respond to what's real in a particular moment. So that for me is a continual challenge. Like, I ended up doing a lot of improvisational performance and music. And that was another example where, yep, I know how to play this song with this band, but I'm way more interested in playing with this other band where we don't even have songs. We're just getting out there and playing like way past free jazz. So yeah, for me, that's just an interesting place to play. I also like structure. I like writing haiku or writing, I write a newspaper column, 800 words, I can hit your 800 words on the mark. That's fun for me, being a reporter, very structured environments like that. I write some songs that are, verse, chorus, verse. But I feel like there's other places where it's important to just keep pushing myself towards a place where I'm in a kind of holy state of communing with whatever's real in that moment, and whatever energies healthy energies, positive ones that want to use me as a vessel. That happens in an intuitive tarot practice. There are messages coming from, I don't know what you want to call it. I call it the great woo. That's just like, whatever. It's the woo-woo stuff. I don't know who's out there, but they often have messages for other people. And folks like me, part of our job is to relay those messages. And we can do that through tarot readings, mediumship, astrology readings, that kind of stuff.
That's a good segue to something I wanted to clarify. Toward the beginning of this conversation, you and Scoop were talking about your most recent tarot reading, and we're about at the end of our time. I hate to kind of leave that hanging. Can you say a little bit about that most recent tarot reading, and what you found in the cards?
I can't remember because I've done quite a few tarot readings in the last few weeks. I'm
talking about the one on the podcast.
Scoop, do you remember what it was about?
Oh, let's see. It was the King of Cups. And
right. Okay.
It was all about cups, outside. Basically. I forget who was thrown in the middle. You had 3 different cards.
Right. Yes. So I do remember that day. I've had very interesting responses to that reading. Apparently it resonated in a very exact way with a number of people. So we did pull the King of Cups that day, and the 6 of Cups and the Fool. And to me at that time, responding to that moment, part of what this was speaking to was the quality of relationships in this time of COVID, and the very interesting conflicts that a lot of people are having, and thoughts about old lovers. That's coming up for a lot of people. They're thinking about exes. They're perhaps connecting with people from their pasts. They're finding great challenges to their present relationships, including the relationship with the self. Very important one, especially if you're stuck alone with yourself in an apartment in a city for 8 weeks or whatever. So the cards in that case, I felt, were directing us to look for positive ways of maturely tapping into our own emotional energy and really feeling it, allowing ourselves to have our real emotions. And that's a recurring theme in the Burning Tarot. We live in a society where we don't deal very well with emotion. Most of us haven't been taught how to. And a lot of the methods for dealing with emotion are actually about suppressing, oppressing, repressing, or getting rid of those emotions, or being so incredibly zen that you magically push through them and you show equanimity all the time. And my approach is different, I feel that. And I love how the cards illustrate that. They'll show you, here's an emotion, an emotional tendency, and that's okay. You can just work with that for this week. You've got your King of Cups. Maybe he's reversed. You've got your 6 of Cups. Maybe this is a time when you're thinking about your past. You're having a nostalgic moment. And instead of fighting that or fighting the sensitive feelings around it, maybe sorrow or grief or regret, my approach is more like, okay, let's go into it. Let's go down in there and have those feelings. And the cards will kind of give us a little indication of what's coming up next and help us make sense of where we're delving. And they can just plain give advice. sometimes quite surprising advice. As the reader, I'll pull a card that I expect is going to tell us all to have a calm and peaceful weekend. And instead it says, this is a conflict weekend. Get ready. And I like being warned. I like going, okay, I'm going to get ready. I don't know if that even answered your question.
No, it absolutely did. And I want to thank you, T, for joining us today.
Well, thanks so much for having me. This is great fun. John, it's been wonderful knowing and communicating and working with you over all these years. You've been a really
3 decades.
Yeah. And at Fringeware, the focus on having a healthy marketplace, there was a whole manifesto about that I believe you wrote in conjunction with others at Fringeware. That influenced me. I was a very young woman at the time, but I find myself referring to those ideas in my current work. I work with a project called Kid Made Camp. And when they invited me to partner with them, it's like an entrepreneurial camp, and kids make stuff and sell them at the farmer's market. It's totally fun. And when I partnered with them, I said, I'll partner with you, but I want to focus on making the market positive and teaching the kids to look at the environmental and social effects of their entrepreneurship. And a lot of that was, directly influenced by your work. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Well, I mean, kind of what we were about then was acknowledging the fact that markets are communities, or should be and can be. And that's what we built. We built a community market of sorts that we wanted to have online. Of course, we weren't able to accept credit cards at the time online. So we made a catalog and it became a magazine, and we had a pretty good, fun time of it, a great run.
It was neat. It was wonderful for me, certainly, and left a lasting mark. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
You may follow Tiffany and listen to her podcast, Burning Tarot, at tiffanyleebrown.com. You can stay in touch with Plutopia at plutopia.io. On Facebook, look for @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. With John Lebkowski, I'm Scoop Sweeney. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.